He once ate an entire raw onion like an apple, without flinching, just to win a bet nobody actually asked him to compete in. Not because he enjoyed the pain, because winning something, anything, in a house where the smartest brother always got noticed first, was the only currency Reese Wilkerson had ever found that reliably belonged to him. Reese Wilkerson never needed to be tough. He needed a category where he could actually come in first. Welcome back to the Character Couch. I've rewatched this show enough times to see past the shock value of his stunts, and for years I laughed at Reese the same way everyone does. The dim, aggressive brother whose solutions to every problem involve violence or raw onions. But you don't just see a kid who enjoys chaos for its own sake. You see a middle child who got boxed out of the one currency his family actually valued, intelligence, and built an entire identity around the one arena left uncontested. By the end of this video, every reckless, aggressive thing Reese Wilkerson has ever done is going to look a lot less like stupidity, and a lot more like a boy fighting for the only spot on the podium nobody else wanted. There's a psychological framework for what's happening with Reese. Birth order theory suggests that lunch unconsciously carve out distinct roles within a family system to avoid direct competition with a sibling who already dominates a particular domain. When one child claims intelligence as their territory, a nearby sibling often shifts entirely away from that arena, seeking status somewhere else instead, even if that somewhere else is considerably more destructive. Reese didn't fail to be smart. He stopped competing in a category he'd already watched Malcolm win and went looking for a different scoreboard entirely. Malcolm's genius-level IQ is identified early in the family's life, immediately reorganizing how the household perceives intelligence, attention, and potential. Malcolm gets pulled into special classes, receives specific parental focus around his academic future, and becomes, without ever asking for it, the sibling whose mind the family treats as exceptional. For Reese, only slightly older, that shift happens directly in his own home, redefining a category he might have once competed in as now permanently claimed by someone else. Rather than struggling visibly to keep pace intellectually, Reese effectively exits that competition altogether, a common unconscious response when a sibling's dominance in one area feels too established to challenge directly. That withdrawal from the intellectual arena didn't leave Reese without ambition. It simply redirected all of it toward physical dominance, the one measurable category left where he could actually win outright. Lois runs the household with an intensity and control that leaves little room for nuance, dispensing punishment swiftly and often without extensive explanation, treating obedience as the primary currency of the home. Her attention frequently gravitates toward whichever son is causing the most immediate disruption, which means Reese, more chaotic and more openly defiant than Malcolm, often receives Lois's attention in the form of punishment rather than praise. That pattern teaches Reese something specific. Being noticed and being in trouble are, in his house, functionally the same experience. If calm, well-behaved attention goes primarily to Malcolm's achievements, then getting noticed at all, even through conflict, becomes preferable to being invisible. Negative attention, however unpleasant, still confirms he exists in the family's field of vision. That dynamic sets him up for a particular relationship with his father, one where physical roughhousing becomes one of the only reliable channels of affection available to him. Hal is affectionate but erratic, capable of genuine warmth toward his sons, but frequently distracted by his own anxieties, quirks, and impulsive schemes. His relationship with Reese often plays out through physical play, wrestling, roughhousing, occasional shared chaos, rather than through the verbal encouragement or academic pride he more often directs toward Malcolm. For Reese, that physical register becomes one of the clearest channels where he actually receives paternal affection without competing against his brother's intellect. Hal doesn't need Reese to be smart to enjoy tackling him on the living room floor. That specific, uncomplicated affection reinforces physicality as Reese's most reliable currency for connection, well beyond simple sibling rivalry. It also sets a quiet, if unintentional, example that roughness and physical dominance are acceptable, even bonding, ways to relate to the people you care about. Reese's oldest brother, Francis, was sent away to military school before the show's timeline begins, largely due to his own history of rebellion and difficulty fitting into the family's expectations. Francis's absence looms over the household, an example of what happens to a Wilkerson son who pushes too far against the family's rigid discipline. For Reese, Francis represents both a cautionary tale and, in certain ways, an aspirational model, someone who escaped the house entirely, who built an identity through toughness and defiance rather than intellect. Reese's own escalating physicality can be read partly as an attempt to walk a similar path, carving out territory through rebellion, since the academic lane was never realistically available to him. That inherited blueprint, physical toughness as an alternate path to significance, becomes especially visible once a younger brother enters the family dynamic and needs a role model of his own. Reese's relationship with his younger brother Dewey oscillates constantly between genuine tormenting and unexpected tenderness, sometimes within the same episode. Reese bullies Dewey reflexively, the way an oldest sibling in his position might replicate whatever treatment he's absorbed from higher up the family hierarchy. But he also, notably, defends Dewey fiercely against outside threats, a protectiveness that goes beyond simple family obligation. That contradiction makes sense once you consider what Dewey represents to Reese, someone lower in the family hierarchy than himself, finally, a role Reese has never previously occupied. Tormenting Dewey lets Reese experience a kind of dominance he doesn't get elsewhere in the household. Protecting him fiercely, meanwhile, reflects something more genuine, an instinct to give Dewey at least some of the loyalty Reese himself often didn't receive from those above him. That complicated, inconsistent care reveals a boy capable of real tenderness, just rarely given a consistent enough model to express it without also needing to dominate first. Amid Reese's largely destructive reputation, one recurring detail complicates the picture significantly. He possesses genuine, sometimes remarkable culinary skill, occasionally impressing even trained chefs with talent that seems entirely at odds with his usual persona. It's one of the show's most pointed pieces of characterization, deliberately placed to contradict the assumption that Reese has no real capabilities beyond violence. That hidden skill matters because it reveals Reese isn't actually limited in ability. He's limited in which abilities his family and environment ever bothered to notice or cultivate. Cooking requires precision, patience, and genuine intelligence, exactly the traits nobody in his household thought to look for. Once Malcolm had already claimed the smart one designation. It's a quiet tragedy tucked into an otherwise comedic detail, a boy with real, specific talent that almost nobody around him ever thought to encourage, because his role in the family had already been decided before anyone checked. Reese's friendship with Stevie, Malcolm's physically disabled best friend, offers one of the more unexpectedly gentle relationships in the show. Reese treats Stevie with a rough but genuine camaraderie, rarely condescending, occasionally including him in schemes with the same casual loyalty he'd extend to any other friend. That relationship reveals something important. Reese's aggression is largely reserved for arenas involving hierarchy, competition, or perceived threat, not simply generalized cruelty toward anyone weaker than himself. With Stevie, there's no competition for parental attention, no sibling rivalry at stake, just an actual friendship, uncomplicated by the family dynamics that otherwise drive so much of Reese's behavior. That contrast between his family relationships and his friendship with Stevie suggests his aggression is circumstantial rather than fundamental, deployed specifically where the stakes of the family hierarchy feel highest. To understand Reese fully, it helps to understand the cultural moment surrounding gifted education during the show's era. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw a significant rise in specialized gifted programs and academic tracking in American schools, systems designed to identify and cultivate exceptional students, often at the expense of resources or attention for their siblings deemed merely average. That institutional framework directly shapes the Wilkerson household. Malcolm's placement in a gifted program isn't just a family decision. It's the product of an educational system actively sorting children into hierarchies of perceived worth based on measurable intelligence, with little institutional interest in cultivating whatever less quantifiable talents a sibling like Reese might actually possess. Reese isn't just failed by his family's attention. He's failed by an entire academic culture that had already decided, using tests and track placements, which Wilkerson's son was worth investing in. There's a second layer of context worth examining. American masculine culture, particularly for boys coming of age without much access to emotionally expressive language, has long treated physical toughness and aggression as acceptable, even admirable, substitutes for more vulnerable forms of communication. Reese didn't invent the idea that fighting, physical dominance, and reckless stunts could function as a legitimate identity. He absorbed a broader cultural script that offers boys, especially those who feel overlooked in more traditionally validated arenas, physicality, as one of the few socially sanctioned paths to respect. In a culture with more room for boys to express insecurity or hurt directly, Reese's specific brand of aggression might have found a considerably less destructive outlet. That cultural permission, alongside his family's specific dynamics, gave Reese both the motive and the socially available tools to build an identity almost entirely out of physical dominance. Reese's brief romantic pursuit of a girl named Jessica reveals a rare moment of genuine vulnerability, effort, and earnestness beneath his usual bravado. He tries, awkwardly and sincerely, to be someone worth choosing romantically, stepping outside his typical aggressive persona in ways that surprise even people who know him well. That earnestness matters. It suggests Reese's toughness isn't the entirety of who he is, just the persona that gets rewarded most reliably in his usual environment. Given a context where aggression isn't the currency that matters, a first crush, genuine connection, Reese reveals a capacity for sincerity his family rarely gives him room to express. It's a small, easily overlooked storyline, but it hints at a version of Reese that might have developed quite differently under different family circumstances. Reese's relationship with teachers and school administrators throughout the series is almost uniformly adversarial, treated by the institution as a discipline problem to be managed rather than a student with untapped potential worth investigating. Few adults in his educational environment ever seem curious about why he behaves the way he does, defaulting instead to punishment and low expectations. That institutional response mirrors his family's dynamic almost exactly. Just as Lois and Hal's household already decided which son was the smart one, Reese's school largely decided which student was worth genuine investment, based on early academic sorting rather than any deeper examination of his actual abilities, including the culinary talent no teacher ever seems to notice or ask about. It's a quiet indictment of how thoroughly institutions can reinforce a family's existing labels, offering a struggling kid few genuine opportunities to be seen as anything other than the role he'd already been assigned before anyone bothered to look closer. But here's the part that caught me completely off guard. Malcolm, the one everyone frames as the innocent genius simply enduring his older brother's chaos, largely blameless in the family's dysfunction, he's also, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, someone who quietly benefits from Reese, absorbing nearly all of the family's disciplinary attention, freeing Malcolm to exist as the golden child almost entirely unchallenged. Think about it. Malcolm rarely has to compete for positive attention precisely because Reese has already claimed the family's negative attention so completely. Every time Reese acts out, gets punished, or dominates a scene with chaos, Malcolm's own position as the favored, gifted son becomes just a little more secure by comparison, without Malcolm ever having to do anything to earn that contrast himself. So the brother everyone assumes is simply the more sympathetic Wilkerson son has actually been quietly relying on Reese's dysfunction to keep his own privileged status in the family uncontested, benefiting from exactly the dynamic that pushed his brother toward violence in the first place. What Reese deserved, back before anyone had sorted him into a category and stopped looking any further, was proof that intelligence wasn't the only thing in that house worth noticing. Not an onion eaten raw to win a bet nobody asked him to enter. Not a reputation built entirely on toughness because the smarter lane had already been claimed. What he actually received was a family and a school system that decided early which son was worth investing in and left him to build an entire identity out of whatever was left over. He built a version of himself that could win at something, anything, because losing quietly in every category that actually mattered had never once felt like an option. He built it so thoroughly that a genuine talent, real and unmistakable, sat completely unnoticed for years, hidden behind a reputation nobody thought to question. And in the rare moments someone looked past the persona, a plate of food that surprised even a trained chef, an earnest crush that asked nothing of his toughness at all, that was the boy still waiting to be seen, finally quietly, showing what he could have been all along. The fighting was never about the fighting. It never was. So was Reese Wilkerson simply the dumb, violent brother, or something else entirely? Neither, honestly. Reese wasn't a naturally aggressive boy who happened to lack intelligence, and he wasn't a hidden genius merely performing toughness for effect. He was someone who read the room correctly, saw exactly which lane his family had already filled, and built his entire identity in the only space left over, because nobody, not his parents, not his teachers, ever thought to ask what else he might have been capable of. Maybe that's truer of more kids than we'd like to admit. Sometimes the one labeled the troublemaker isn't lacking ability at all. He's just been sorted early and permanently into a role nobody bothered to double-check. So here's what I want to know. If Reese had been born first, before Malcolm's intelligence ever got identified and claimed, do you think he still becomes the aggressive one? Or was that role always going to fall to whichever brother came second? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into the characters you thought you already understood, hit subscribe. The couch is always open.